Thanks very much. I want to give you a taste of my passion for the latest thing I'm into, which is really diet myths and microbes. And I'm coming to this after 23 years of studying twins, which you might say is slightly strange. But this has been my passion for the last 23 years because they're the most amazing experimental human model you can have. And they are the best studied people on the planet. We've really looked at every single omic you can look at in these people, on exactly the same people, with regular diet histories and looking after their health. And in this time, as part of the things I've been doing with other groups, we've found about 100 genes, for example, for obesity, and genes underlying diet, behaviors, and all kinds of other things. And after this, it was great to find genes, but you realized also that this didn't predict very much at all. I wasn't able with these common variant genes to really understand much about obesity, what made people tick. And at the same time, about 5 or 6 years ago, I had a major health event at the top of a mountain, which made me change my perceptions. And so I wanted to find more about health and healthy diets myself. And I thought, after 25 years in this business, I'm a doctor, I've studied the subject, I must just go to the literature for a few months, this is going to be dead easy. I was completely wrong. It's a nightmare. You go into the literature, even as an expert person, and try and dissect out what's right and what's wrong, what's complete rubbish and what isn't, and all you find are dogmas without any real evidence to support them. Counting calories works. Remember, all calories are equal. Avoid high-fat, deadly foods. Eat starchy foods instead. Never skip meals. Get your 5 a day. Calories in equals calories out. It's so simple. Every doctor, like myself included, has been telling overweight patients it's just a simple matter of eating less and exercising more. What's happened in that time? We've tripled the rates of obesity in every country measured. So it's been a pretty miserable failure, and there isn't one diet that fits all. So I clearly wanted to change tack, and what were we missing in all this? And a good example of why we keep saying these dogmas is the idea of fat. If it was given a different name, it would be great, but it isn't. We're stuck with it, and we say fat is bad. Saturated fat is deadly. What's the evidence? The evidence is now from a randomized controlled trial, the biggest one ever done, called the Predimed study, which was basically 7,000 Spaniards aged around 60, randomized to 2 diets for 5 years. The biggest study ever done. And the 2 diets were, one, a high-fat Mediterranean diet with lashings of olive oil, fatty cheese, yogurts, cream, fatty bits of meat with nuts and a bit of fruit and veg, compared to the healthy, doctor-approved, low-fat diet for people at high risk of heart disease with low dairy or low-fat dairy and lean cuts of meat and fruit and vegetable. And what happened after 5 years? The study was stopped early because a third of the people in one of the groups were dying more of strokes, heart disease, they were getting more diabetes, they were actually getting fatter, and they had more breast cancer. And which group was it? It was the low-fat group. Now, not much has actually happened after this amazing result was produced in the world's leading medical journal, and you might wonder why. And I think one of the reasons is we've just got so obsessed with these ingredients of food, we forget what food actually does. And I think the big missing factor is what's the other organ we've forgotten, and that is our microbiome. This is the organ inside our lower intestines, our colon, that contains 100 trillion microbes that, with 100 times more genes, outnumber our body's cells and our genes many-fold. And these are little engines that are pumping out chemicals, hormones, vitamins, etc., and keeping us alive, keeping our immune systems sorted out and helping even our brain development as well as our digestion. And what's interesting is we're all very different. We've heard how we are 99.5% similar in terms of our DNA, but in terms of our microbiomes, we share only about 20% of it with each other. We're incredibly unique. And this is a whole part of us we haven't factored into our individuality. And I can now tell you that at the moment, just getting some of your microbiome, I can tell a hell of a lot more about your health than I can from your DNA. And this is coming from someone who's been studying genetics for the last 25 years. Now, the twin study I told you about 5 years ago, we started on top of these other tests to measure the microbiomes of all of the twins. And we found that after being born sterile, the microbiome stabilizes at about 3 years of age. And identical twins, we found, do share a bit more of their microbes than you would have thought. Not hugely, but there are some microbes that seem to like certain people more than others, and that's for genetic reasons. And others really don't like you at all. And we found this, but we also found interesting differences between fat and thin people. And we found the odd twin, identical twin pairs who are genetic clones, who had a 15, 20 kilogram difference in weight all their life after the age of 18. Just one got fat when they ate, the other one didn't. And what was the difference between them? Massive differences in their microbes when we looked. And what was different was that they also had different diversities. The fat one always had less species than the other one. And one particular microbe we always found in the skinny twins was this bug that no one ever heard of called Christensenella. And we took it from the twins, this lean microbe, put it into mice, and you could stop them getting fat even when you give them high-fat meals. We've extended this work looking at obesity and even central fat, and we find lots of microbes that are protective. And the latest one we've looked at is something called Akkermansia. This is something that comes out when you go on long fasts and nibbles away at your lining of your gut. It seems to like that. But what's really cool about this is that if you take Akkermansia and say, well, how can you get more of it if it's really good for you? And a study in the US this year has just shown that eating red grapes actually boosts the level of Akkermansia in mouse models. And then when you take the microbes from the mice and you put them into other mice who have been otherwise sterile, you can give them huge amounts of fat and they don't put on weight. And that's not where the story ends. It just shows how this area is so fast moving. You can take that Akkermansia, put it in a little capsule, and give it to humans. And there's a clinical trial already going on within about 6 months of this result in Brussels, looking at overweight diabetics. So this is just the tip of the iceberg of what we can do with this knowledge and how quickly we can make that circle without waiting the famous 17 years that most normal pharmaceuticals take. Now, for my book, I was studying all kinds of diets and going on my own experiments, and I just finished the 3-day intensive unpasteurized French cheese diet, which I have to tell you about another day. But I was not quite looking forward to the next experiment, which was the 10 days McDonald's diet, to see what effect that would have on my microbes. So I was going to do a supersized me experiment, and I thought I'd limit it at 10 days. And until a better volunteer came along who happened to actually like fast foods, and he was also hard up for money, and I was going to pay for all the meals, and he also happened to be my son. So it was the perfect combo. So Tom did this, he was very keen, all his friends were very jealous. But after 3 or 4 days, though, the novelty had worn off a bit. And he said, Dad, I've done this now, do I really have to carry on? And as a father, I was concerned. And I said, absolutely carry on, this is science. Which he did. And otherwise he'd have to pay me back for the other McDonald's. And at the end of the 10 days, he'd really had enough. And his brain and his body had really freaked out on this. But what's more important is that what's happened inside him. What happened to his gut microbes that we'd been measuring every couple of days, and it turned out he'd lost 40% every couple of days, and it turned out in that time. This was a bit of a shock to us studying this, and it turned out that this change had happened after about 4 or 5 days, and even 2 weeks later it was still there. We couldn't reverse it. So why would junk food do this? We've heard how the sugar and the fat, the high levels, are bad for you, but no one's really explained why that should be. We're all exposed to fat and sugar. So the other reason it could be affecting our microbes is the lack of fiber. They're literally being starved. Your microbes need fiber to survive and to get the diversity. So there's not much fiber in these meals, apart from that little bit of gherkin that I think Heath threw out anyway. So that's one possibility. The other is the other nasty chemicals that are in all processed foods, not just burgers. The emulsifiers that are ubiquitous in all the processed foods we have. These have a really nasty effect on our gut microbes, making them more likely to produce diabetic and obese type pictures. There's also artificial sweeteners, which we're told are safe and inert as they pass through our body. Well, they're not safe and inert for our microbes. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are many more of these chemicals that are going to affect us in this way. So we've heard what's bad. Well, what can you do that's good for your microbes? Well, we all know fruit and veg are good for us, but understanding why, I think, is important, because it's the high fiber vegetables that are good, the root vegetables particularly, those that contain things like inulin are particularly good. So chicory roots, Jerusalem artichokes, globe artichokes, leeks, onions, garlic, and if you're going to have a bit of fruit, you must have some, then bananas are the best ones. So that's the fiber. Then you've got the fibers in things like nuts, which used to be thought of as deadly for your fat, but actually they're very good. But they also contain these magic polyphenols that are food for your microbes and allow them to produce other chemicals that are really good for your body. And other polyphenol producers that we've been told about are coffee beans, dark chocolate. I'm not talking about Hershey's or dairy milk. You've got to get the 70% plus to get the benefits. Then you've got red wine. Much to the government's annoyance, I think there's some evidence that actually a little bit of red wine with all those polyphenols is good for you, as well as extra virgin olive oil. They're the prebiotics, they're the fertilizers, but what about probiotics? How many people here have regular yogurt? Oh, what a healthy audience you are, right, okay. But it hasn't always been that way, and most people know now that yogurt contains live microbes. Less people know that most cheeses also contain lots of live microbes, and so they're a probiotic food as well. Then you've got increasingly people using kefir, which has even more different types of microbes, and you've got other fermented foods like kimchi, sauerkraut, and all the fermented soy ones, which might be the reason that the Koreans and Japanese are more healthy than us. But do they work? When you take a probiotic capsule, do they work? People say, oh, they get wiped out by the stomach. They probably don't work. Do they? Don't they? Well, they really do for most diseases that's been tested if you happen to be a laboratory rodent. All the studies are incredibly positive. And that's probably because they all have the same standardized microbes inside them, whereas we're all very different. But they do work in humans if you're very sick, very elderly, very young, or on antibiotics. And there are now personalized ones coming along which are really exciting at the moment, which can do specialized tasks because they've looked bioinformatically at the genes of these microbes, and they're creating ones that can lower your cholesterol, that can be used in immune therapy and preventing cancer, toxicity of drugs, and importantly for people like me, reducing hangovers. So probiotics are really a fast evolving area in this field. But if none of this has worked, and you want a real makeover of your gut microbes, taking 20 of these tablets could be for you. They're what we doctors technically call frozen poo. and they come from healthy donors. The Americans call them crapsules. Now, they sound kind of fun, depending whether you're a donor or a recipient, probably. But they are serious medicine. They are approved in most countries for preventing Clostridium difficile recurrence. And there are 500 centers in the US alone who are performing these transplant operations. And they're going to start being rolled out into other diseases very shortly. So watch this space, but also be careful if you go out there and do it yourself, where you get your donor from. There are a couple of case reports of people who've got a lot fatter after it because the donor was a bit chubby. So a little warning there. To sum up, understanding your microbes is a bit like understanding an English country garden, and that's what you want to aim at. Realize you've all got a unique soil. You need to treat it differently. You need regular natural fertilizer, which is your prebiotics. You need to drop on those seeds, those yogurt, on a nearly daily basis to keep it going. Vary things with the seasons and like our ancestors used to. Avoid those nasty toxins, so processed foods, antibiotics, and pesticides. And above all, realize that the more diverse the foods you eat, above all, realize that the more you put in there, particularly the high fiber ones, the more diverse your microbes are going to be and the healthier you're going to be. Now, to understand what's inside your microbes, you really need to look. And there's no way to do this on the NHS or on our health services, but there's several crowdfunding operations which we've started, one called the British Gut, which is affiliated with the American Gut Project, where several thousand people have already signed up, and it's a popular way of getting your science. And we're also about to launch a company here that will provide personalized advice about your diet based on your microbe profiles. So watch this space, but if there's one message to go home with tonight, realize that with 100 trillion microbes inside your guts, you'll never dine alone again. Thank you.